They forgot me long before that wedding day. But it was there, standing by the kitchen door while my parents smiled for the cameras, that I finally understood what being invisible really meant. I wasn't part of the toast, or the photos, or the family they showed the world. I was just background noise in a life I was born into. Years later, when they saw me pull up in a $200K Porsche on Facebook, their calls came flooding in. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. I'm Maddie, and this is how I learned that sometimes silence can build an empire louder than any applause. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. The ballroom at the Willamette Gardens glows gold, the kind of light that makes everything look softer, wealthier, more perfect. 250 guests fill the space, laughing, toasting, drifting from one conversation to another like champagne bubbles. White roses line every table, each centerpiece flawless and identical. A string quartet plays something delicate and expensive. It's the kind of wedding where even the napkins smell like money. I adjust the strap of my pale blue dress, the one I found on sale, after 2 hours of debating if it looked formal enough. Mom told me not to wear anything too bold. It might clash with the color palette. She said it with a smile that made it sound like a suggestion, but I knew better. I'd done my own makeup because the stylist was booked solid. Or maybe because Mom didn't want me in the way while she fussed over Emily's hair. When I enter the bridal suite, Emily stands in front of the mirror, radiant in white lace. Mom is behind her, fixing a stray curl, her expression glowing with pride. Dad is next to them, phone in hand, snapping photo after photo. No one notices me standing in the doorway. I clear my throat softly. "You look beautiful, Em." Emily glances at me through the mirror, smiling briefly. "Thanks, Maddie. Could you grab my clutch?" "It's on the dresser." "No, I'm glad you're here. Just another errand." I hand it to her, then step aside as Mom waves for the photographer. "Family photo before we go down," she chirps, positioning herself next to Emily. Dad joins in, his arm wrapped around them. I wait for a moment that never comes. Should I start, but the photographer's flash cuts me off. The picture's already been taken. Downstairs, the ceremony area is a magazine spread come to life. Rows of white chairs twinkle lights hanging like captured stars. The coordinator ushers me to my seat. I look at the place card. Table 12, near service door. It's next to a swinging door that bursts open every few minutes with waiters carrying trays. The air smells faintly of garlic and grease. My dress will carry that scent home. From here, I can see everything. The head table where my parents Emily and her new husband Mark will sit, the VIP tables packed with Dad's colleagues, Mom's church friends, and Emily's bridesmaids. I can see, but no one can see me. I'm invisible, in plain sight. The ceremony begins. Emily walks down the aisle on Dad's arm, her veil glimmering under the chandeliers. Mom dabs her eyes, squeezing Dad's hand. Guests sniffle, whispering how perfect she looks. I smile, polite and practiced. When the minister says, "Who gives this woman?" Dad's proud. "Her mother and I do" hits me harder than I expect. It's the sound of belonging, and I'm on the outside of it. At the reception, the laughter grows louder. Glasses clink, waiters glide between tables. I sip my champagne, slowly counting bubbles just to stay grounded. When the MC calls family of the bride, "Please come up for photos." I rise halfway, then freeze when a coordinator gently blocks me. "Sorry, just immediate family." He's polite, professional, like he's done this 1,000 times. I nod, forcing a smile. Of course. I sit back down, feeling the weight of my own breath. From across the room, I watch my parents beam as they pose with Emily and Mark. The photographer adjusts their posture, asks for one with just Mom and Dad. No one gestures for me to join. Mom's voice carries through the microphone. "We couldn't be prouder of our daughter. Emily has always been our shining star." The applause that follows sounds like a wave crashing too close to shore. I lift my glass in a silent toast no one notices. "To stars," I whisper. My throat burns when I drink. Dinner begins. The clatter of plates, the scent of roasted chicken. My table is half empty. The people here are distant cousins, a couple of co-workers who already slipped off to dance. A waiter rushes past the edge of his tray, catching my elbow. A splash of red wine spills onto my lap. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," he stammers. I dab at the stain with my napkin and smile. "It's okay. I'm sitting in the right place for accidents." He laughs awkwardly, disappears through the service door. I look down at the wine stain, dark and blooming like a bruise. Around me, laughter roars again. The band starts a familiar song, something slow, romantic. The newlyweds share their first dance under a cascade of fairy lights. Mom and Dad watch from their table, holding hands, faces glowing. I stand quietly, finish what's left in my glass, and walk toward the back. The air near the kitchen is warmer, louder. A waiter shouts, hot behind, as I step aside. I push open the door to the hallway, the hum of celebration fading behind me. The neon emergency light buzzes overhead, flickering against the stainless steel walls. My reflection looks pale, older somehow. For a moment, I let myself breathe. No one will notice I'm gone. They didn't notice I was there. My hands tremble slightly, but I keep my face calm. If there's one thing I've learned, it's how to disappear gracefully. Outside, the night air smells like rain and roses. The laughter from the ballroom muffles behind the heavy doors. I look back once at the golden light spilling through the windows. Somewhere in there, my family is celebrating. I'm not angry. Not yet. Just tired of pretending I belong. I walk toward the parking lot, my heels clicking on the pavement, echoing in the quiet. The moonlight catches the faint shimmer of my dress, and for a brief second, it almost looks beautiful. I smile to myself, small private, and whisper under my breath, "You were there, Maddie. They just didn't see you." Then I unlock my car and drive away. Leaving the music and the laughter behind, morning light spills weakly through the thin curtains of my apartment, painting long stripes across the hardwood floor. The sound of a garbage truck rumbles from the alley below the ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday that feels heavier than most. I reach for my phone on the nightstand, still half asleep, and the screen bursts to life with notifications. Emily Bennett tagged in 47 new photos. I scroll, thumb moving on autopilot. The pictures are perfect. Emily and Mark under the arch of roses, Dad beaming beside her. Mom laughing, a crowd of people who all look like they belong. I zoom in on one of the wide shots, scanning the background. No trace of me. It's as if I'd never been there. A quiet ache settles in my chest. I toss the phone aside and stare at the ceiling fan spinning lazily. My own voice echoes in my head, steady and distant. It's strange how you can disappear while standing right in the middle of your own family. I sit up, pull my hair into a loose bun, and wander into the kitchen. The sink's full of dishes from last night. Coffee grounds scatter across the counter. I pour water into the kettle and lean against the fridge, eyes unfocused. My gaze lands on the sketchbook lying half open on the table. Inside, half-finished charcoal drawings. Faces of strangers on the subway, a streetlight in the rain, an empty park bench. I used to dream of being an artist back when I still believed my family would care about what I created. I remember being 10, kneeling on the living room carpet, holding up a drawing of our old house. Dad barely looked up from the newspaper. "That's nice, sweetheart," he said before turning to Emily. "You ready for your piano recital?" By high school, I'd won an art scholarship. Mom framed Emily's debate trophies, her honor roll certificates, even her student council ribbons. My scholarship letter sat tucked in a kitchen drawer. One night, I'd asked why. She didn't look up from stirring sauce. "Sweetie, art's a hobby. You need to focus on something practical." The kettle clicks. I pour the water, watching the dark swirl of instant coffee bloom in the mug. The bitterness comforts me. It's sharp real. At work, the office of Brand Hive Media smells of toner and stale cologne. I sit through another brainstorming session where our creative director, a man who calls himself a visionary, presents my campaign idea as his own. "It's all about emotional storytelling," he says, gesturing at the board. "Something people can relate to." The team nods, impressed. I sit in silence, scribbling notes I'll never use. After the meeting, he pats my shoulder on his way out. "You're a great support, Maddie. Keep it up." I smile, because that's what women here do. At lunch, I eat at my desk. My coworker Jessica leans over. "You going to the Women in Media event tonight? Naomi Rivera's speaking." I glance at the flyer on her screen. "Create your own seat at the table." Something in the tagline tugs at me. Maybe I say, though I already know I'll go. The auditorium is packed that evening. Mostly women, some taking notes, others just listening like they're trying to remember how to breathe. Naomi stands on stage in a navy pantsuit, her voice rich and grounded. "No one invited me to the table," she says. "So, I built my own damn table." The room erupts in applause. She talks about rejection resilience and what it costs to stay silent. Her eyes sweep over the crowd, and for a heartbeat, lock with mine. I feel something shift, like she's speaking directly to the version of me still sitting at table 12 by the kitchen door. Afterward, I wait by the stage as people line up to meet her. When it's my turn, I introduce myself, stumbling a little. I really needed to hear that, I admit. Naomi smiles. Not the polite kind, but the kind that sees through you. What's holding you back, Maddie? The question catches me off guard. I open my mouth, close it again. Fear, I guess. Of failing. Of being invisible. She tilts her head. You've already survived being invisible. That's harder than failing. Her words stay with me all the way home. The apartment feels smaller that night, like the walls are listening. I change into sweats, pour a glass of cheap red wine, and sit at the kitchen table with my laptop. My resignation email is already half written from a dozen nights of hesitation. Dear Brian, I've decided to move on from Brandhive to pursue other opportunities. Thank you for the experience. I read it 3 times, fingers hovering over the send button. My chest tightens. This job is safety routine, a paycheck. But it's also the quiet kind of death. The kind you feel, but no one notices. I think of Naomi's voice. You've already survived being invisible. I hit send. The sound of the email whooshing away feels final, irreversible. For a long moment, I just sit there, staring at the laptop screen. My reflection stares back in the black glass, tired eyes, coffee stains on my sweater. A woman no one really sees. Then I close the lid. The room falls into soft darkness, lit only by the glow from the street outside. I lean back, exhale, and let a small, unfamiliar smile find its way to my lips. For the first time in years, I've made a choice that's mine. The new year came with more rain than I remembered. Portland always dripped in winter, but that January felt endless, gray mornings bleeding into darker nights. My apartment no longer looked like a home. The couch had become a storage shelf. The dining table was covered in storyboards, sticky notes, and half-empty coffee cups. I'd pushed my bed against the wall to make space for a tripod and a light kit I'd bought secondhand. The room smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. My first client was a local coffee shop called Maple and Steam. They wanted a 1-minute ad for social media, something authentic but viral. I spent 2 sleepless nights filming steam rising from espresso cups, slicing shots of latte art together, chasing that feeling of professional legitimacy. When I finally sent it off, they replied, "This is great, but we'll pay next quarter." Next quarter? The words felt like a punch. I had rent due in 10 days. I kept a spreadsheet of what people owed me highlighted in red. Every week the red spread wider. I'd lie awake listening to the rain on my window, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Then came the letter from my credit card company. Payment overdue. Immediate action required. I stared at the bold type for a long time, then crushed the paper in my fist and tossed it on the table. The pile of unopened mail beside it was growing taller every day. Still, I kept working. A local gym hired me to make short motivational clips for their new app. The owner said, "We'll pay when we hit 10K downloads." I nodded, pretending that was fine. I was too scared to sound desperate. Most days, I worked 16 hours straight. When exhaustion hit, I'd open my sketchbook and draw logos, shapes, ideas that didn't belong anywhere yet. I wasn't sure what I was building, only that I couldn't stop. It was in the middle of one of those days, camera batteries dying my stomach hollow from skipping lunch, when I saw her again, Naomi Rivera. She walked into the cafe where I was editing footage, the same cafe where I'd filmed my unpaid ad. She ordered black coffee, then spotted me. "Maddie Cooper," she said, sliding into the seat across from me without asking. Her tone was half curious, half knowing. "You look like someone fighting off sleep and hope at the same time." I laughed weakly. "That sounds about right." She nodded toward my laptop. "You still building something?" "Trying to," I admitted. "It's not exactly going great." She folded her hands on the table. "You've got that look I recognize. The one people get before they either quit or explode into something unstoppable. Which one's it going to be?" I hesitated, staring down at my chipped mug. "I want to be unstoppable," I said, barely above a whisper. Naomi smiled. "Good answer. Now prove it." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small folder, and slid it across the table. Inside were investment forms. $50,000. Not charity. Partnership. "I believe in what you're doing." My throat tightened. "Naomi, I can't take that. What if—" She cut me off gently. If you fail, then you learn. But I'm betting you won't. You've already survived worse. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling slightly. I won't let you down, I said finally. I know, she replied, standing. Name your company something that means something to you. And don't forget to pay yourself even a little. Women like us have a habit of giving everything away. That night, I sat in the glow of my desk lamp brainstorming names. Outside, the rain had turned into a drizzle. I flipped through my sketchbook, stopped at a drawing I'd done months ago, a moon reflected on a dark lake. I wrote the word Luna beneath it. Light that doesn't come from itself, but still shines. Luna Media Studio. It felt right. I filed the paperwork the next morning. My first hire was a 24-year-old intern named Sophie Tran, a film student who'd messaged me after seeing one of my local ads. Her email had been shy but confident. I know I'm young, but I see stories the way light sees glass. When we met, she reminded me of myself. Quiet, eager, apologizing for taking up space. I asked about her family. She said they wanted her to be a nurse. They think storytelling's for people who can afford to dream, she said, laughing without humor. We became a strange kind of team, 2 women building something out of late nights and leftover takeout. We'd work until dawn editing videos while lo-fi music hummed through tiny speakers. The only light came from our screens and the cheap lamp I'd found at a thrift store. Sometimes we'd talk about families, the way they can make you feel both loved and erased. Sophie once said, "You think they'll ever see what we see?" I shook my head. Maybe not. But that doesn't mean we stop creating. Our first big client came almost by accident. A local organic skincare brand saw our coffee ad online and asked for a similar video. I didn't tell them the coffee ad hadn't been paid for. I just said yes. Sophie and I spent 3 days shooting sunlight on glass jars, hands dipping into creams, reflections off mirrors. When the final cut went live, the video exploded across Portland's social feeds. The brand's sales tripled in a week. 2 days later, the check cleared. The first real payment. I took Sophie out for pizza and brought a bottle of cheap white wine. We sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment boxes, open computer screens glowing with our logo. Luna Media Studio. To us, I said, raising my glass. To light that doesn't ask for permission, Sophie replied. We laughed until we couldn't breathe. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt like the world had finally turned its head just a little to look my way. By the time December rolled around, Luna Media had grown into something that no longer fit inside my small apartment. We moved into a glass office on the 22nd floor of a downtown Portland high-rise overlooking the gray river and bridges that always looked half asleep in the fog. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows that first morning watching the city breathe below. For once, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. The team had grown from 2 to 15, designers, videographers, copywriters. Every morning they filled the space with coffee chatter and the hum of ambition. Morning boss Maddie, someone shouted as I walked in, my coffee balanced in one hand, laptop bag on the other. I smiled. Hearing that still felt strange, like the word boss belonged to someone else. We'd just signed a $2 million contract with a national wellness brand. It was the kind of deal that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. Naomi called me from Los Angeles, her voice calm but proud. You did it, kid. You built something that stands on its own. When I hung up, I just sat there staring at the skyline. For years, I had measured success by how close I could get to my family's approval. Now I realized I didn't need them to see me at all. The next weekend, I walked into the Porsche showroom on Burnside. The smell of new leather and polished steel hit me like perfume. Rows of cars gleamed beneath bright white lights, as if each one were quietly aware of its own perfection. A salesman in a tailored suit approached with a practiced smile. Good afternoon. Looking for something special? I already found it, I said, my eyes locked on a 911 Turbo S, metallic gray, sleek as moonlight. He led me closer, handed me the key fob like he was offering something sacred. She's beautiful, isn't she? I nodded, fingertips brushing against the steering wheel as I slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cool beneath my palms. The dashboard lights came alive with a gentle hum. For a second, I didn't breathe. I'd spent years riding buses that smelled like wet coats and old gum, watching the city pass through scratched windows. Now, sitting here, I felt the quiet hum of everything I'd built vibrating under my hands. The salesman asked, "Do you want to personalize the license plate?" I thought for a moment, then smiled. Luna 33. He jotted it down, grinning. Nice choice. Sounds like a company that knows who she is. The test drive took me along the empty stretch of highway by the river. The car moved like it knew my pulse. The city blurred past in silver streaks. I rolled down the window, letting the cold air tangle my hair. My reflection in the side mirror looked older, calmer, and for once, completely my own. That night back home, I parked in the garage and just sat there, hands resting on the wheel, the soft ticking of the cooling engine filling the silence. I took out my phone and snapped a photo. The car, glowing faintly under the overhead light. The concrete around it catching the reflection like water. I opened Instagram, typed out a caption. Built, not inherited. For a few minutes, I watched the screen waiting for the little red hearts to appear. I wasn't sure who I expected to see. Old coworkers, clients, maybe distant relatives scrolling by. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it was mine. 3 days later, I woke up to the buzz of my phone on the nightstand. The light from the screen flashed in the dim room. I blinked at the notification. Mom family meeting. Be there. Just that. No hi, sweetheart. No, how are you? Not even a question mark. I stared at the message for a long moment, the kind of stillness that happens before a storm. Then I laughed softly, the sound half bitter, half tired. No greeting, no context, just an order I muttered to myself. The phone buzzed again. A follow-up. Tomorrow at 2. Everyone will be here. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The tone said it all. They'd seen the Porsche. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the couch. Outside, the city lights reflected on the window, mixing with the faint glow from the car below. The apartment was quiet, but not lonely. I turned on some music, soft jazz, something without lyrics, and leaned back. The wine tasted sharp grounding. For years, I'd imagined what it would take for my family to finally reach out. I thought it would be a wedding, and a milestone, and a moment of shared pride. Not a car, not a Facebook post. I stared through the glass eyes, catching the faint shimmer of the Porsche emblem. So this is what it takes, I thought. Metal paint and 4 wheels. A strange calm washed over me, not sadness, not even anger. Just clarity. Maybe it wasn't about making them see me anymore. Maybe it was about seeing myself without them. The city hummed below. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. I took another sip of wine, eyes, unfocused, letting the quiet settle. In the reflection of the window, I could see the faint outline of the Porsche logo glowing under the garage light. It looked like a small, defiant moon, and for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. The sky over Lake Oswego was the color of cold steel when I pulled into my parents' driveway. Leaves skittered across the pavement, brushing against the tires of the Porsche before gathering in small, defeated piles. The house looked the same. White siding, trimmed hedges, the porch swing Dad swore he'd fix every summer, but never did. Only now it seemed smaller somehow, as if the years had worn the pride out of it. Through the window, I caught a flicker of movement. The living room curtain shifted just slightly. A silhouette. Mom! I could almost feel the sharp inhale when she saw the car. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment, the silence humming louder than the motor ever did. My reflection in the rearview mirror was calm, composed. Not the girl who used to cry in this driveway because her parents forgot another birthday. I stepped out. The gravel crunched beneath my boots. When I reached the front door, it swung open before I could knock. Mom stood there perfectly composed in her pearl earrings and beige sweater, though her eyes betrayed a quick flash of surprise. Maddie, she said, her tone measured. You made it. Of course, I replied, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Wouldn't want to miss a family meeting. She forced a smile, stepping aside. The smell of lemon polish and nostalgia hit me as I crossed the threshold. The entryway hadn't changed. Same oak console table, same framed photo of Emily's wedding. My own milestones, college graduation, my first art show, were nowhere to be seen. The living room was too tidy, like it had been staged. On the mantel, another enlargement of Emily and Mark frozen mid-laugh. I stood there a moment studying it until Emily's voice broke the silence. Hey, stranger! She appeared from the hallway wearing a cream-colored dress and too much perfume. Been a while, huh? I smiled politely. Yeah, A few years, I guess. Mark Bennett followed close behind, crisp suit, perfect hair, a lawyer who never stopped performing. Maddie, he said with an outstretched hand. Good to see you. We've heard about your success. Quite the entrepreneur now, huh? Something like that. I said, shaking his hand briefly. His grip was firm, calculated. Dad cleared his throat from across the room. He sat in his favorite armchair, the one that used to creak when I'd sneak down past curfew. His voice carried the weight of authority he'd never really earned. Let's get to it. We have family matters to discuss. Nice to see you too, Dad, I said softly. But he either didn't hear or chose not to. Mom gestured toward the couch. Sit, sweetheart. I made tea. I didn't correct her that I preferred coffee now. I just sat placing my purse beside me, hands folded in my lap. The silence thickened. Everyone pretending to sip, waiting for someone else to start. The ticking of the clock filled the space between us. Finally, Mom tried for lightness. You've been busy, I hear. Luna Media, right? Such a pretty name. You must be doing very well. I'm doing okay, I said, careful not to give them more than they asked for. Emily crossed her legs, her gold bracelet glinting. Mark and I saw your interview in the Chronicle. It was impressive. Thanks, I replied. The compliment landed flat like an envelope with nothing inside. Dad leaned back, clasping his hands together. It's good that one of you kids made it big. Emily and Mark have had a rough year with the economy, but you... He paused, eyeing me over his glasses. You seem to be doing just fine. There it was, the setup. I looked at each of them one by one. No one asked how I'd been, if I was happy, if I'd found what I wanted in life. Just silent appraisal, calculation. Mom set her teacup down gently. Families should stay united, she said. Her voice taking on that practiced softness, especially now that one of us has found success. We could all use each other's support. I gave a small nod, though I knew exactly what that word, support, meant in this house. Dad shifted in his chair, the leather sighing beneath him. Let's not waste time, he said, his tone turning businesslike. We need your help with something. It's nothing major, just a small favor. I leaned back slightly. A favor Mark spoke up before Dad could. More like an opportunity. There's a situation we're trying to handle discreetly. Mom's eyes darted to him, then to me. Maybe we should explain. But Dad raised his hand, cutting her off. We'll get to that. For now, we just need to know that we can count on you, your family. That still means something, doesn't it? I met his gaze, unflinching. Depends what you mean by family. The words hung there for a moment. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Mark pretended to check his watch. Mom forced a laugh, the kind people use to smooth over cracks in the floor. Oh, Maddie, you always had that sharp humor. I smiled faintly. Guess it runs in the family. The air in the room felt heavy, as if every unsaid thing we'd avoided for years had settled into the furniture. Dad leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on me. You've done well for yourself, and we're proud truly, but right now we need a little help, just for a while. I tilted my head, studying him. The phrasing was too rehearsed, too careful. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be small, I see. I said quietly, tracing the rim of my teacup with one finger. And what exactly do you need? He smiled, thin and cold. We'll talk about that in a minute, but first I just want to say how good it is to see you, sweetheart. It's been too long. I could almost hear the lie hum in the space between us. I leaned back against the couch, eyes flicking once more to the framed wedding photo on the wall, Emily and Mark surrounded by everyone who mattered. Everyone except me. For the first time since I arrived, I smiled. Not the polite kind, the knowing kind, because now I finally understood. This wasn't a reunion. It was an agenda. And I was the missing piece they'd suddenly remembered. The dining room smelled faintly of lemon polish and tension. The long outs-old table gleamed under the chandelier, set not with dinner, but with stacks of folders and a sleek black briefcase. No one spoke as I took my seat. Even the ticking wall clock seemed louder than usual, each second pulling tighter at the silence. Mark was the first to move. He unclasped his leather briefcase with a deliberate click, pulling out a folder thick with documents. I appreciate you coming, Maddie, he said, his lawyer's voice smooth and controlled. This isn't exactly an easy situation. I folded my hands on the table. Seems like that's becoming a family theme. His jaw tightened, but he kept smiling. My firm's been under review by the IRS. Routine stuff, really. but one of our investment accounts got flagged. It's complicated. We need to move some assets temporarily, keep them protected while we clear things up. He slid the folder toward me. You're the only one we can trust to hold the paperwork. The words landed like a carefully placed trap. Trust, I repeated, tapping the folder lightly. That's a strong word coming from people who didn't trust me enough to send a birthday text. Mom, Linda, made a show of dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Oh, honey, please don't bring that up. You know how busy things got with Emily's wedding, I cut in. Yeah, I remember. I had a good view from next to the kitchen. Emily's expression flickered. Guilt, then defensiveness. Maddie. That wasn't our choice. The planner picked the seating chart. I said, leaning back. Sure. The room went quiet again. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the sound of a car passing outside. For a second, I wondered if any of them realized how absurd this was, inviting me here not to apologize, but to ask for a favor. Dad, Richard, broke the silence. You're being dramatic. This isn't about the past. This is about doing the right thing, for who I asked. He frowned. For your family. Mark pushed the folder closer. It's perfectly legal, Maddie. All you'd be doing is signing as a temporary trustee for one of our holding companies. Just until the audit passes. I didn't touch it. And what happens if it doesn't? He hesitated just long enough to tell me everything I needed to know. Mom leaned forward, her voice trembling in just the right places. Sweetheart, you've always been the responsible one. We know we can count on you. Think of your sister. Think of the girls. The girls. I echoed, glancing at Emily. She clasped her hands in her lap. The twins. Their tuition's on the line. If this falls apart, they'll have to leave their school. They love it there. For a moment, I just watched them all. The perfect tableau of practiced guilt. My mother's watery eyes, my father's frown of disappointment, Emily's pleading smile, Mark's calculated calm. The same cast, different act. I opened the folder. Inside, the pages were dense with numbers, company names, and signatures. At first glance, it looked legitimate. But buried among the legal jargon, I spotted inconsistencies, missing disclosure pages, overlapping accounts, money routed through shell corporations. This isn't routine, I said quietly, flipping through another page. This is fraud, Mark stiffened. I wouldn't call it that. What would you call it then? A misunderstanding? I looked up, meeting his eyes. You're asking me to help you hide money from the federal government. That's not a misunderstanding, Mark. That's a felony. Dad's voice hardened. Watch your tone. We didn't raise you to be disrespectful. I turned to him slowly. No, you raised me to stay quiet, to smile and pretend everything was fine while you ignored me for 28 years, so forgive me if I don't play that role anymore. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound sharp enough to make Emily flinch. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You owe this family some loyalty. I stood up. Loyalty goes both ways, Dad. Don't be selfish, he snapped. Your sister needs help. That's what decent people do. I picked up the folder, flipped to the last page, and ran my finger over the empty signature line. My name didn't belong there. You want me to save you from the consequences of your own choices, I said softly. You ignored me when I needed you, and now you remember I exist because I have something you don't. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint creak of the floor as I stepped back from the table. Mom whispered, "Please, Maddie, don't turn your back on us." I looked at her. The woman who used to brush Emily's hair while telling me I was too sensitive. The woman who had called this meeting like she was summoning an employee. I'm not turning my back, I said. I'm protecting myself. I set the folder down gently, aligning it perfectly with the table's edge. Richard rose from his chair, his voice rising with him. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this when you realize family is all you have. I turned toward the doorway, my coat draped over my arm. Funny, I said without looking back. I've been alone for years. Turns out it's not that bad. My heels clicked against the hardwood as I crossed the room. Behind me, I heard his voice sharp and angry. You're betraying us. I stopped at the threshold, hand resting on the doorframe. No, I said quietly, meeting his reflection in the hallway mirror. I'm finally protecting what's mine. And with that, I walked out, leaving their silence and their lies behind me. The city lights reflected across the glass walls of my apartment, soft gold against the dark. Portland looked peaceful from up here, like the whole world was breathing slower than I was. The hum of distant traffic mixed with the faint buzz of my laptop as I opened Facebook, a habit I thought I'd broken years ago. The screen loaded, and the algorithm betrayed me. Memories from On This Day. Emily's wedding photos. I hesitated before clicking, already knowing what I'd find. There they were. My parents, Emily, Mark. The vineyard bathed in late afternoon light, everything pristine and symmetrical like a magazine spread. I enlarged the first photo, Dad, his arm around Emily. Both of them smiling, as if the world revolved perfectly around them. Mom's pearl necklace gleamed under the sunlight. Then I found myself. Half an image barely visible at the edge of the frame, my face cut off by a shoulder. In another picture, I stood behind a group of guests, blurred and slightly out of focus, like I was never meant to be seen. My stomach twisted. I scrolled faster through dozens of pictures, every single one carefully framed to tell the same story. Emily, the golden daughter, surrounded by love and pride. Me, the shadow edited out of their narrative. Even in their memories, they'd made sure I didn't exist. I closed the browser, exhaling slowly. My reflection in the dark screen looked tired, but clear-eyed. I pulled open a drawer beside my desk and took out an old wedding invitation. Cream cardstock, embossed lettering. The handwriting across the bottom read, "Our little girl begins her new life. We're so proud." No signature. No mention of me. I ran my thumb along the paper's edge before tearing it cleanly in half. The sound was sharp, satisfying. I dropped the pieces into the trash and watched them fall. I picked up my phone, scrolling through old notifications. Family tagged you in a post. Emily shared a memory. Relatives commented on your sister's big day. Dozens of messages filled the screen. Praise, congratulations, hearts, smiley faces. None addressed to me. I opened my photo gallery. One by one, I deleted every image that tied me to them. Family dinners, birthdays, the rare forced Christmas selfies. I stopped at a picture of my Porsche in the garage, its metallic gray surface reflecting light like a mirror. I uploaded it to my story with a single caption, "Not invited. Still driving forward." The blue posted icon flashed, then disappeared. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then, something lighter. Relief, maybe. A small reclaiming of space I didn't know I still needed. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Luna Media office. Sophie burst through the glass doors, ponytail swinging, clutching her iPad like it was treasure. "Maddie," she said, breathless. "The Portland Chronicle just emailed. They want to interview you. A full feature, about your story, the company, everything." I blinked, the words taking a second to land. "The Chronicle," she nodded enthusiastically. "They said they've been following your work since the last campaign went viral. They want to highlight women founders who built something from scratch." I smiled, though a part of me hesitated. "That's great," I said. Sophie grinned. "I already told them you'd say yes." When she left my office, her excitement still echoing down the hallway, I leaned back in my chair. The Chronicle. Public recognition. Validation, the kind my parents had reserved for Emily her entire life. And yet, my first instinct wasn't pride. It was caution. My phone buzzed, interrupting the thought. Naomi's name lit up the screen. "Tell me you're saying yes," she said, not even waiting for a greeting. I laughed softly. "You heard already, Portland's small," she replied. Her tone softened. "But listen to me carefully, Maddie. You don't need the media to prove anything. You've already done that. This," her voice warmed, "is about taking back your story before someone else writes it for you." Her words hit deep. I looked around the office. The framed posters of past campaigns, the awards lined neatly along the shelf, the quiet hum of people creating something that had once lived only in my head. Maybe it was time. Maybe the silence I'd lived under wasn't strength. It was fear. I stood walking toward the window. Outside, the Willamette River shimmered faintly in the afternoon sun. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, but also steadier. "I'll do it," I said finally. "But not to prove them wrong. To remember who I am," Naomi exhaled, satisfied. "That's the only reason worth doing anything. I'll connect you with their editor tomorrow. You ready for the questions they'll ask?" I smiled, watching the city below. I've been ready for years. After we hung up, I stayed by the window for a long time. The hum of the office carried faintly behind me, Sophie laughing with the design team phones ringing, keyboards clattering. I thought of my parents' house, the photo of Emily on the wall, the way their eyes flickered with recognition only when they saw the car. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just clarity. They had written me out of their story, but now I had the chance to write my own. The rain had started before I left the city, turning the drive to Lake Oswego into a long, gray blur. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the clouds hung low and heavy, swallowing what little light was left of the afternoon. The house looked darker than usual, curtains drawn porch light off like it was holding its breath. I sat in the car for a moment, engine idling, watching the wipers drag slow arcs across the windshield. My heartbeat was steady but loud, each thud echoing in my chest. When I finally turned off the ignition, the silence was deafening. The front door opened before I could knock. Mom stood there, her hands twisting a dish towel. Her lipstick was too bright, her smile stretched too thin. "Your father isn't feeling well," she said quickly, almost rehearsed. "Please, Maddie, just be gentle, okay?" Her eyes flicked toward the driveway, toward the Porsche. For a moment, I thought I saw something like envy or resentment flash there. Then she looked away. I stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and tension. In the dining room, Dad sat at the table, surrounded by stacks of papers, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. His complexion looked perfectly healthy. Whatever heart trouble Mom mentioned clearly didn't extend beyond his conscience. Mark sat beside him, back straight, hands folded, eyes sharp. The lawyer mask again. Dad gestured vaguely toward a chair. "Sit, sweetheart. We just need to clear up a few things." I stayed standing. What kind of things? Mark didn't waste time. He slid a stack of documents across the table. "Authorization papers. We need you to sign them. It's just temporary, gives us control over certain assets so they don't get seized during the review." I didn't touch the folder. "You mean during the IRS investigation?" He smiled thin and cold. "Those are just words, Maddie. It's all technical. Nothing illegal." "Then why not hire a lawyer?" I asked. His reply came fast. "Because lawyers don't have loyalty. Family does." The silence that followed was like static. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table. One tap, and the red recording light glowed. Mom froze. "What are you doing?" "Protecting myself," I said calmly. "If this is all perfectly legal, then no one should mind a record of the conversation." Dad's face tightened. "This isn't necessary. It is," I said. "You've lied before. I'm just making sure there's no confusion later." Mom took a step forward, voice trembling. "You think we'd hurt you?" "We're your family." "Funny," I said, meeting her eyes. "That word doesn't mean what you think it does." Dad's tone softened suddenly, the switch from anger to pleading as quick as I'd expected. "Maddie, please. We're talking about our family's future here. You're our daughter. Blood is blood." I stared at him for a long moment, the rain hammering against the windows behind me. Blood shouldn't be used as a shield for lies. He flinched slightly, his gaze dropping. Mark broke the silence, voice low and tight. "Do you even hear yourself right now? You think you're better than us? Because you've made some money, because you drive that car." I stayed quiet. The sound of rain filled the room. He pushed back from the table suddenly, palms slamming against the polished wood. "You think that Porsche makes you family again? You think it erases where you came from?" His anger rolled off him like heat. I met his glare, my voice even. "No, you're right. That car doesn't make me family." I paused. "But neither does manipulation." Emily, who had been silent in the doorway, finally spoke. "Maddie, please. Can't you just help us this once? You're acting like you don't care what happens to us." I turned toward her almost gently. "You're right. I don't. Not anymore." Mom covered her mouth as if the words themselves were violence. Dad leaned back in his chair, disappointment dripping from every syllable. "I don't even recognize you. You never tried to," I said. The thunder outside cracked sharp and loud like punctuation to everything left unsaid. I reached for my bag, sliding the strap over my shoulder. "I think this meeting is over." No one moved. As I turned to leave, Mark's voice cut through the air venomous. "You walk out that door, and you're not part of this family anymore." I stopped at the doorway, hand resting on the frame. The rain outside had turned heavier, blurring the world beyond the windows into streaks of gray. I looked back at him, at all of them, their familiar faces twisted in fear, pride, desperation. "You keep saying family like it's supposed to mean something, but family isn't a title. It's a choice." Their silence followed me through the hallway. When I stepped outside, the rain hit cold against my face, soaking through my coat in seconds. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I walked slowly to the car, every step feeling like the shedding of an old skin. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and watched the house through the windshield one last time. The lights inside flickered as shadows moved past the windows. Still arguing, still blaming. The rain drummed on the roof, steady and relentless. I whispered into the quiet, almost to myself. For the first time, I don't feel guilty for leaving. And as I drove away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it finally disappeared behind the storm. The morning light spilled through the wide glass windows of the Luna Media office, soft and pale, against the polished concrete floor. I was barely through my first sip of coffee when Sophie burst through the door. Her voice, breathless face glowing with excitement. "Maddie, you need to see this." She was waving a newspaper, the kind no one bought anymore, the Portland Chronicle. The front page was folded back, and even from across the room, I saw my own photo smiling up from the paper. Sophie placed it on my desk like it was something sacred. The headline read, "Self-Made Woman Builds Legacy Supports Female Creators." For a second, I just stared. Below the headline, the subtext continued, founder of Luna Media. Madeline Cooper turns adversity into empowerment, creating a space for women in digital storytelling. There were photos of our team at the studio, Sophie laughing over a camera, Naomi standing beside me at the last event. A candid of me mid-speech, but what caught me was the quote Naomi had given them. "She's proof that women don't need to be invited to have a seat at the table. They build their own." I ran my hand over the smooth paper. For years I'd wanted recognition, not fame, just acknowledgement that I existed, that what I did mattered, and now it was here in ink and headlines. "Maddie, you're trending," Sophie said, scrolling through her phone. "Twitter, LinkedIn, even Facebook. Everyone's sharing it. You've got like 40 partnership requests in the inbox." As if on cue, my phone started buzzing. Emails, texts, calls, investors, journalists, former clients who'd once ignored my proposals, now wanted meetings. I smiled, a small one, the kind that comes from disbelief more than pride. Naomi walked in just then, holding 2 coffees. "So you've officially broken the internet," she said, setting 1 cup in front of me. "I told you the world just needed to hear your voice." I laughed softly. "Guess it was time." Her expression softened. "Proud of you, Maddie. You earned every word of that article." The office around us hummed with energy, phones ringing, staff celebrating the low soundtrack of a dream that had finally arrived. But somewhere beneath the buzz, a quiet part of me wondered if my family had seen it too. I didn't have to wait long for the answer. That afternoon, while I reviewed a campaign proposal, Sophie gasped from across the room. "Oh my God, turn on Channel 8. The television mounted in the corner flickered to life, cutting to a breaking news banner. IRS launches formal investigation into Bennett and Partners Law Group. I froze. The reporter's voice was steady, professional. Sources confirm that Mark Bennett, managing partner of the firm, is under federal review for fraudulent investment practices. Financial documents obtained by investigators indicate multiple offshore accounts and falsified records. A photograph of Mark flashed on screen, followed by footage of reporters outside a gated suburban house. My parents' house. The camera caught Linda on the porch, hand over her mouth, reporters shouting questions she didn't answer. Richard stood behind her face, hard and pale. Emily appeared briefly in the doorway, eyes red before the feed cut back to the anchor. For a moment, no one in the office said anything. Sophie turned down the volume, her face pale. "That's your brother-in-law, right?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "And your parents." "They'll be fine," I interrupted, though my voice didn't sound convinced. I turned back to my desk, staring at the newspaper still lying there. The words "self-made woman" printed in bold. I thought about how they must have seen it that morning, how the story of my success and the story of their downfall had crossed paths on the same day. Karma didn't need me to plan it. It just needed timing. By evening, Luna Media was busier than ever. Naomi organized a small press gathering at the office. Reporters lined up near the window wall, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. I stood at the front with Naomi and Sophie beside me, the hum of rain outside like applause from the sky. I kept my words simple. When I started this company, I didn't want revenge. I wanted space, to create, to breathe, to prove that women can build without permission. Success isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about freeing yourself from the people who made you doubt you could. The room fell quiet for a heartbeat. Then applause broke through. Naomi squeezed my shoulder proud. Sophie was beaming. Later, when the crowd had gone and the office was still again, I sat alone at my desk, scrolling through the flood of messages. There were congratulations, partnership offers, invitations to speak. And then, buried among them, one email stood out. The subject line read, "No title, no greeting." It was from Emily. The message was just one sentence. "You won, Maddie." Happy now, I stared at the words for a long moment. In the reflection of my screen, the city lights shimmered across my face. I thought of Emily's wedding, of the kitchen table seat, of the silence that had followed every attempt I made to be seen. There was no satisfaction, no triumph, just the quiet certainty that I didn't need to reply. I hovered over the message, clicked delete, and watched it disappear. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the city clean. The late autumn sun stretched long and gold across the glass walls of the studio, painting slow-moving shadows on the floor. The day had been calm. Editing deadlines met the hum of quiet music filling the air, until the sound of heels echoed down the hallway. When I looked up, Emily stood in the doorway, wrapped in a beige trench coat, her hair pulled back but undone in places. She looked smaller than I remembered. "Hey," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I hesitated before nodding toward the meeting room. She followed her steps careful, like she was afraid the floor might shatter beneath her. We sat across from each other at the long table. The smell of coffee lingered faintly from earlier meetings. She kept her eyes on the cup in her hands. "Not on me. I didn't know where else to go," she said finally. "Everything's falling apart." I stayed silent, letting her fill the air. She swallowed hard. "I didn't think it would get this bad. The reporters keep calling. They're twisting everything, saying we're criminals, that Dad's finances were part of the investigation too." Her voice cracked. "Mom hasn't slept in weeks. She cries every night." Still, I said nothing. Emily took a shaky breath. "I came here to apologize." She paused, eyes glistening. "I know I should have stood up for you back then, at the wedding, with Mom and Dad, with Mark." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "I didn't mean for you to be pushed away." Her apology hung there fragile as smoke. "Go on," I said quietly. She blinked. "What?" "You didn't drive across the city just to say sorry. What do you want, Emily?" She flinched at my tone but didn't deny it. "If you could just help us. Maybe make a statement to the press. You're respected now. If you said the story's been exaggerated, they might back off. I could tell them you don't blame us." I let out a slow breath, a sound somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. "So that's what this is. Damage control." Her eyes filled with tears. "No, that's not." "Even when you apologize," I said gently, "you still calculate what you can gain from it." She looked down, shoulders trembling. "You think I don't hate myself for what happened? For not inviting you to the photos, for letting Mom pretend everything was perfect? I was just trying to keep the peace." "The peace you kept was built on silence," I said. Emily's tears spilled over her mascara, smudging. "You don't understand what it's been like. The firm's collapsing. Mark barely talks to me. People whisper everywhere we go. I can't even take the girls to school without someone asking about the investigation." I reached for the box of tissues on the table and slid it toward her. "Emily, listen to me. If you're really sorry, then stop trying to rewrite what happened. Take responsibility. Tell the truth. Don't hide behind excuses." She dabbed at her eyes, her breath hitching. "I just thought maybe that I'd fix it for you." I finished for her. Her silence was answer enough. After a while, she stood, pulling her coat tighter around her. "You've changed," she said softly. I met her gaze. "No." I finally stopped pretending I hadn't. She gave a small nod, eyes glimmering with something like regret, and turned to leave. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hall, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The studio fell quiet again, the kind of silence that carries its own weight. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath since she walked in. A knock on the door broke the stillness. Sophie stepped inside, hesitant. Was that your sister? Yeah, her brows furrowed. Are you okay? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the fading light outside. I'm fine. Just tired. Tired of what? I smiled faintly. Of the past, thinking it can still knock and come in whenever it wants. She didn't press. She just nodded, gave a quiet smile, and left me to the fading afternoon. When the sun finally dipped behind the skyline, I shut my laptop and walked into the editing bay. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of monitors. I sat, opened one of the archived folders, and clicked play on the oldest file I had. The video flickered to life, grainy, handheld footage from years ago. A younger version of me looked into the camera, nervous but hopeful. I just want to be seen, she said. Not noticed. Seen. The recording ended abruptly, the screen going black. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the reflection, staring back at me, older, stronger, quieter. I didn't need to be seen by anyone else anymore. I'd already learned how to turn the light on myself. The snow was falling in slow, deliberate flakes, soft enough to make the city seem quieter than usual. Selwood always felt gentler in winter. Small houses with glowing windows, the scent of roasted coffee curling from cafe doors. When I pushed open the door to Riverside Cafe, the little brass bell above it gave a low chime that cut through the hum of conversation. They were already there. My parents sat at a corner table near the window, steam rising from their untouched cups. Dad. Richard looked older than the last time I'd seen him. His shoulders were slightly slumped, hands wrapped around a mug, as though he needed the warmth to keep from shaking. Mom sat beside him, her scarf neat, but her eyes puffy. When they saw me, both straightened a little. For a brief second, I could almost feel the muscle memory of walking toward them as a child, hoping they'd smile, say, "We're proud of you." But that instinct was gone, now replaced by something steadier. I crossed the room and took the seat opposite them. No one spoke for several seconds. The sound of milk frothing at the counter filled the space between us. Dad finally cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming." His voice was quieter than I remembered. "We wanted to see you in person." I folded my hands around my cup. I figured. He glanced at Mom, then back at me. "We made mistakes, Maddie. Big ones. We forgot about you when we shouldn't have. I don't know how to undo that." Mom's lip trembled. "We just wanted peace. For everyone to be okay. Maybe we pushed too hard, trying to keep up appearances." I let their words settle. For years I had imagined this moment, every version of it. In some, they cried and begged for forgiveness. In others, I walked away before they could speak. The reality was smaller, quieter. And that somehow made it more real. I used to dream about hearing that I said softly, about you admitting it. But now, I don't need it. Mom looked down, eyes glistening. "Maddie, please. We were wrong, but we can make this right. We're still family." Dad reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly. "Can you give us another chance?" I looked at the hand that once taught me to tie my shoes, the same one that had pointed toward the kitchen table when he told me where to sit at Emily's wedding. Slowly, I pulled my hands back into my lap. "Not every mistake can be fixed," I said, "but you can learn to live with it." He flinched as if the words themselves hurt. Outside, the snow thickened, clinging to the window pane. A child laughed somewhere behind us, the sound bright and oblivious. Mom's voice cracked. "You've become so strong. I don't even know who you are anymore." I gave a small, sad smile. "You could have if you'd looked." Silence again. The kind that used to choke me as a child now felt strangely freeing. I reached into my purse, pulled out my wallet, and slipped a few bills onto the table. "This one's on me." I said, my tone even. "You don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you." Dad frowned. "You don't have to." I know, I said, standing. "That's the point." The receipt printed behind the counter, and I walked up to take it. The paper was warm when I set it on their table beside the coffee cups. Small, simple proof that I could take care of myself, that I no longer needed them to sign for anything on my behalf. Mom reached for my arm, but stopped halfway. Her hand hovered in the air, uncertain, before falling back to her lap. I gave them both one last look. No anger, no triumph, just stillness. "I hope you both find peace," I said. Dad nodded faintly, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. I turned toward the door, the bell above it chiming softly again as I stepped outside. The air was crisp and sharp flakes of snow catching in my hair, and melting down the collar of my coat. For a moment, I stood on the sidewalk, watching the reflection of the cafe in the glass. Through it, I could see them sitting there. 2 aging figures framed by warm light and silence. They didn't look cruel anymore, just small. I took a deep breath, exhaled, and started walking. The snow muffled my footsteps, the cold air filling my lungs until it almost stung. They had finally remembered me, but the truth was I had remembered myself long before they ever tried. A year later, the sound of applause rolled through the grand hall of the Portland Arts Center like a soft wave. The Rivera Women in Media Foundation launch had drawn more people than I expected. Filmmakers, journalists, students, and a few faces I hadn't seen in years. The stage lights reflected off the polished floor, casting a warm glow over the banners that read, "Empowerment through Creation." Naomi stood beside me at the edge of the stage, dressed in her signature navy suit, calm and radiant. She squeezed my hand lightly. "You did it, Maddie," she said, her voice low but steady. "Everything you've built led here." I smiled, though my throat felt tight. "We did it," I whispered back. The announcer's voice carried through the room. "Please welcome the founder of the Rivera Women in Media Foundation, Madeline Cooper." I stepped forward. The lights dimmed and the room hushed to a near-perfect silence. From the podium, I could see the sea of faces, hopeful, curious, inspired. Somewhere in the front row, Sophie was holding her phone up, smiling eyes, shining with pride. I took a deep breath and began. There was a time I said my voice clear over the microphone when I sat next to the kitchen at my sister's wedding, believing I didn't belong. That my voice was small, that success, attention, and love were things I had to earn. The room was utterly still. But I learned something. I continued. Your worth isn't determined by who notices you. It's defined by who you become when no one's watching. A murmur of agreement moved through the audience. I felt it. The shared understanding of women who had been overlooked, dismissed, talked over. I used to think I needed an invitation. I said, pausing to meet their eyes. Now I know. If no one gives you a seat at the table, you build your own. Applause erupted. The sound filled the space, breaking through the invisible walls that had once surrounded me. Sophie and the Luna Media team stood together near the front, clapping, cheering. I caught Naomi's proud smile from the side of the stage, her eyes glinting with tears she would never admit to. I gestured toward the 3 young women standing nearby, each holding a scholarship certificate. Tonight, we give our first scholarships to 3 incredible creators who remind us that potential has no gatekeepers. As I handed each recipient her award, their hands trembled with joy and disbelief. The same tremble I'd once had when Naomi first believed in me. I saw my younger self in them. Nervous, hungry, unstoppable. Flashbulbs went off. The applause rose again. When the ceremony ended, I slipped out onto the balcony, overlooking downtown Portland. The city sparkled below, rivers of light weaving through the dark like constellations. The cold air bit gently at my skin, but I felt warm. Below my Porsche sat under the soft halo of a street lamp, its metallic silver surface reflecting the city lights. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a symbol, not of wealth, but of independence, of finally steering my own life. Naomi joined me carrying 2 glasses of champagne. She handed one to me and leaned against the railing. "You've come a long way from that 1-bedroom apartment with the flickering lamp," she said. I laughed softly. "Feels like a lifetime ago." "It was another lifetime," she said. "You built this one from scratch." I nodded, watching the slow drift of headlights over the bridge in the distance. "You know what's strange," I said. "When my parents finally reached out again, I thought I'd feel something. Relief, maybe. Or closure. But I didn't. Just calm. Like the noise had finally stopped." Naomi smiled knowingly. "That's what freedom sounds like." I looked out at the skyline, the way the Willamette River shimmered under the lights. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Freedom." For a while, we just stood there, letting the wind carry the faint sounds of laughter and music from inside. When the event ended, I walked down to the street. The night air smelled of rain and cold metal. My car waited spotless steady. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The hum was smooth familiar. As I pulled out onto the street, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, composed, certain whole. They had once forgotten who I was. I thought, until success reminded them. But by the time it did, I no longer needed them to remember. The Porsche glided across the St. John's Bridge, the river glowing beneath me. The sunset had faded into a deep blue, streaked with amber light on the horizon. The wind moved through my hair, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I was simply moving forward. My voice came softly, the same tone I used when I spoke to the audience earlier. But this time, it was just for me, and for whoever might need to hear it. Sometimes I said the best revenge isn't making them regret losing you. It's living a life they can never ignore. The city lights blurred behind me as I crossed the bridge, the car humming steadily beneath my hands. Somewhere between who I was and who I'd become, I had found peace.